preemie babies forcibly expelled from the hospital. There was a man that was just holding a preemie amidst the sound of dropping Israeli bombs, not sure where to go. And if you know anything about preemies, you know that they can't even be held out in the open like that, much less around dropping bombs and chemicals. 18 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Jabalia and Beit Lahia. There are only 2 functioning hospitals in the northern part of Gaza. Al-Auda Hospital is being besieged by Israeli occupation forces and has been out of drinking water for a few days. And there are Israeli tanks in the vicinity, while at Kamal Adwan Hospital, patients who were being wheeled out of the hospital in hospital beds, just rubble everywhere. The ICC prosecutor has applied to the pretrial judges for arrest warrants. But not all the perpetrators, just the ones that they've identified by these arrest warrants, which is not sufficient in undoing the injustice that is actually being perpetrated. Not in the least because there are literally thousands of individuals who are guilty of crimes against Palestinians, of killing Palestinians, of torturing Palestinians, of starving Palestinians, including Israeli so-called civilians who are preventing the entrance of humanitarian aid and cheering as they grab sacks of rice and flour and throw them off the trucks. Or
children of the light who destroy the electric grid for Palestinians.
Hello and welcome to episode 122 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazaGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram, and you can call me Mikey Intifada if you traveled from another country to commit a genocide and then got friendly fired on.
You know what was great about that was the
So much.
family that was like, we are calling on people to attend.
Right.
And it's like,
Can
I
you
heard they were,
attend?
well, I heard that was one of the things they were having trouble with, getting people to attend the funerals of the lone soldiers, the lone wolves.
Yeah, that is sad. Really brings a tear to your eye to think that there's nobody there to mourn
Yeah.
this individual who traveled from Argentina, don't cry for me, Argentina, to occupied Palestine to commit genocide, and then the Israeli occupation army, in a leopard bit my face kind of moment, shot him, or he died in combat. And then instead of admitting that, the occupation prefers to cover it up by saying, yeah, we took him out, actually. The occupation killed him. They're like, our murder machine is so good, sometimes it even takes our own. Okay, come on.
We are on day 227 of this genocide. In the last couple of weeks, Israel has forcibly displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from Rafah, who have either been displaced towards the middle areas of Gaza or towards the west of Gaza, while at the same time Israel continues to bomb and attack Gaza in absolutely every place, including the north. In particular, Jabalia has been repeatedly attacked by the Israeli occupation forces, killing dozens and dozens of Palestinian families. 18 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Jabalia and Beit Lahia. There are only 2 functioning hospitals in the northern part of Gaza. Al-Auda Hospital is being besieged by Israeli occupation forces and has been out of drinking water for a few days. And there are Israeli tanks in the vicinity, while at Kamal Adwan Hospital, we actually saw footage of Palestinians being displaced from the hospital, in addition to patients who were being wheeled out of the hospital in hospital beds amongst a scene of just rubble everywhere, of course, with nowhere safe to go, just being expelled out of the hospital to their own devices, not clear where they're going to go. There's no other hospital to take them, so they're just in a hospital bed in the middle of a genocide. We also saw preemie babies that were forcibly expelled from the hospital as well. And the video that I saw, there was a man that was just holding a preemie amidst the sound of dropping Israeli bombs, not sure where to go. And if you know anything about preemies, you know that they can't even be held out in the open like that, much less around dropping bombs and chemicals and toxins and all the elements. More of the same. These are all crimes that Israel has committed on a number of occasions, time and again, in these last 7 months. In the last 24 hours, we have seen 106 Palestinians be killed and 176 injured. And this all is taking place at the same time that we finally have received word that the ICC prosecutor has applied to the pretrial judges for arrest warrants, in this case, for 3 members of Hamas, including Ismail Haniyeh and Yahya Sinwar, as well as 2 arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. So it's been 24 hours since the ICC news was released. And so by now we've been able to separate the good takes from the very average and not so great takes, which came out in like the 5 minutes after the news was announced, because everybody wants to be the first one to give their opinion. And I'm just going to very briefly summarize. There's a much longer version of this on my live that you guys can go look at, but I'm going to briefly summarize
If I can briefly, let me give my opinion first.
Okay, sure.
No, just a little joke.
No, go for it.
There's a joke about when you were like, everybody wants to have their opinion first, and so then I just jumped in and interrupted.
Well, it's just funny because like in like the first hour, like I had already seen like 20 people post it wrong, saying that like the arrest warrants were issued and they weren't. Right, they weren't. It was an application made by the prosecutor to the pretrial judges for them to assess the evidence, right? And so there was that nuance that was lost, and then people were like updating their takes to be like, JK.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
My thing is like, it's funny because if you look at the promo of the very first Palestine Pod episode, it's like, when the International Criminal Court makes eye contact with an Israeli, that is anti-Semitism.
That's a joke to say that, because then they'll say, oh, you misreported.
Guys, I'm a comedian, so I will occasionally be making jokes on the podcast. And then as a lawyer, I
will be limiting our liability.
Yes. Oh my God, I remember that.
3+ years ago now.
Yes.
And it's like, I'm just going to play the tape back from back then because we've already covered it. Like, we know their playbook. It's wild that they weren't charged with genocide. Like, it's wild that they charged 3 members versus 2. You covered a lot of it in your live, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah, just the disparity in like expecting institutions like that to have our back for real. It is good to see pressure on all fronts. You know, it's not like the resistance is reading this and then they're like, all right, guys, wrap it up. They know what the fuck it is. They got to keep the pressure on. So, you know, everybody moves in unison in their lane, like in their function. Yeah, we'll keep people updated as things are, you know, percolating, but it's like, you know, it's nothing to get too excited at just yet.
No, and you know, one major thing to keep in mind is that what I have seen, there's this pattern that plays out anytime there's a new development in the international legal arena, whether it's something new at the UN Security Council or the UN General Assembly, or there's new provisional measures that are being sought before the ICJ, or now there's this announcement by the ICC, when we have literally been begging on Karim Khan to issue these arrest warrants or to apply for these arrest warrants since October, since the consensus of genocide was already pronounced by scholars of genocide. And in the end, he didn't even end up asking for arrest warrants for genocide, right? He didn't even ask for arrest warrants for several Israeli leaders who are clearly guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, including the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, the guy who literally said there are no uninvolved civilians. It's not true what they say about people being uninvolved in Gaza. There's no such thing as a civilian. That was his language. It's troubling that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are not on there. They should be. They are responsible for some of the most genocidal incitement and rhetoric, which absolutely has trickled down to the soldiers in terms of instructions because they are loud and literally inciting crimes on a daily basis.
There's no shortage of people who should have been on that list, right? And if there's any like lack of evidence that the court is aware of, they should probably just scroll TikTok for like 5 minutes and they would see numerous instances of genocide and genocidal intent.
Correct.
From the top all the way down, right? From your like Ben Gvir's and Netanyahu's all the way down to the soldier who is like modeling in a dead woman's underwear.
100%. And standing in front of graffiti that says Nakba 2023 and smiling, right?
Literally, the writing is on the wall.
Literally. There's no shortage of critiques that we can make of the way that these applications were brought forward in terms of not matching the reality on the ground in terms of the crimes that are actually being committed. But also there's a critique that is broader than this. And that's the critique of what is the ICC even capable of doing, even if it functions properly. And that is simply that it's a criminal court. And so all it's capable of doing is eventually, if it works at its absolute best, leading to the arrest of those individuals and then their punishment in jail, as well as eventually reparations for victims who come forward and make claims with the court. So you're talking about monetary compensation and punishment of the perpetrators, but not all the perpetrators, just the ones that they've identified by these arrest warrants, which, as you can tell, is not sufficient in undoing the injustice that is actually being perpetrated. Not in the least because there are literally thousands of individuals who are guilty of crimes against Palestinians, of killing Palestinians, of torturing Palestinians, of starving Palestinians, including Israeli so-called civilians who are preventing the entrance of humanitarian aid trucks and cheering as they, grab sacks of rice and flour and, throw them off the trucks or stand in front of trucks and prevent them from passing, or beat up truck drivers because they think that truck driver is transporting aid into Gaza, but in reality he wasn't. And it was just like an oopsie moment, but it's not the kind of argument that you think it is because it makes you look like a psycho, right?
Hey, classic case of friendly fire.
Totally. Except it's not friendly.
They're doing friendly fire among civilians and aid workers.
That are not their friends.
Or civilians or aid workers.
People have to remember that even if, and I said this in one of my very first interviews after October 7th, even if Netanyahu is brought before the ICC, their arrest warrants are issued, he is taken to The Hague, he is charged even with genocide, and is found guilty of genocide, this would not undo the 76 years of denial of human rights and self-determination of the Palestinian people that Israel has been enacting. And in particular, it would not serve to render Palestinians justice by giving them any rights, which is the issue here, is that we are colonized people who are denied our most basic human rights, including the right to self-determination. There is no chance, there's no possibility for the court, even if it functions at its best, to dismantle the apartheid regime, to end the occupation, to lead to the Palestinians being able to have their right of return enforced. Because all the court can do is prosecute individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and then punish them and offer the victims reparations. But what it can't do is undo the structural violence of Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. One important thing that Noor Arakat pointed out was that from the court's jurisdiction, one of the glaring omissions is that the court has no jurisdiction over colonialism. So colonialism is invisible to the court, and the crimes that flow from colonialism are invisible, save for if they are committed in the context of, armed conflict, and then it can be a war crime, or if they're, mass atrocities like crimes against humanity. But you never address the underlying issue with this court because the court's not designed to do that. The court also only has jurisdiction over crimes from a certain period of time going forward, from when the state joins the Rome Statute. And so it's not going to be able to go back in time and address the crimes of the Nakba, for example, right?
The Zionists are like, we have brought forth an October 7th calendar. Okay. Everything starts after that. And also, if you look on the back, it's a list.
Well, that is a joke, but it's actually also true because the arrest warrants that Karim Khan is seeking only pertain to alleged crimes that took place on or after October 7th, even though the court in this case has jurisdiction over crimes committed in occupied Palestine since 2014. So, no apartheid, even though it's a crime against humanity, is being assessed. No illegal settlements are being looked at. None of Israel's behavior in its previous aggressions on Gaza in 2021 or 2022, when it bombed the shit out of Gaza in one of its typical mowing the lawn incidents, right? Nothing related to the Great March of Return. Now, Karim Khan's office says that they are continuing to assess the evidence and will come forward with additional crimes for which they are seeking arrest warrants. So let's wait and see what remains to be added. But I do think that we have to be aware of the structural limitations of the court and also the limitations in the alleged in the arrest warrants that he is currently seeking. Understand that there's simply no reason why over 225 days in, when the scholarship consensus on genocide is so clear and there is no shortage of thoroughly researched reports rooted in fact and law, not only South Africa's petition, but also the report of the UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, Anatomy of a Genocide. And also there was a recent report, 105 pages, that was just published last week by a group of human rights experts from Boston University, Yale, Cornell, University of Pretoria, and another university, which I'm now forgetting, that also concluded that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza since October 7th. I encourage you to read that report as well. It's the latest one in a number of reports that have all echoed this consensus. And so there's no reason why the ICC should not have pursued that as well. And the only reason, in my mind, and also Ali Abu Ni'ama pointed this out in his analysis, that perhaps the prosecutor's office has done this, is because they're still wanting to try to appease the West, soften the blow for Israel, not bring the crime of all crimes against Israel, even though that's what the evidence clearly points to. They're going for the low-hanging fruit, which is the war crimes, the starvation, etc. But it makes absolutely no difference because even though he only went for the low-hanging fruit, as of now, the US and Israel still had a completely unhinged response. So it's not like it protected Karim Khan or this decision in any way. He said he will be adding things later, so we don't know where this is going to go, actually. There is a chance he may add genocide later. Some people were saying, oh, he did this as a way to show that he's serious and give them a chance to stop, but clearly they have no interest in stopping. They've been going just as hard on the genocide since this announcement has been made. And Netanyahu has been very clear, and he said nobody's going to stop us. So you have a situation where you have a literal unhinged freak that has the nuclear codes and has been committing genocide for 8 months and has almost completely destroyed Gaza and killed 15,000 children. And there's 10,000 people disappeared under the rubble. And 5% of the Palestinian population in Gaza is either dead, missing, or injured from genocide, while 100% of everybody in Gaza is either between crisis levels of starvation or famine, according to the internationally recognized scale of hunger crises. So that's the situation on the ground, leaving aside the epidemic and disease and the fact that over 760,000 people have respiratory illness, according to the UN, and from a report I just read a few days ago, right, which risks to wipe out so many more people. And that's what Israel wants. That's what one of their ministers said. He said, let there be disease. It's like a satanic version of let there be light, right? Just let there be disease. Just can't think. I don't understand how these people think. It's so contrary to humanity.
Yeah, instead of light, he said, let there be darkness.
Literally, it's Satan. That's where we're at with the ICC analysis for now. Let's see what happens in a month or two when the pretrial judges come back and either issue the arrest warrants or not. There's an extremely great likelihood that they will. And we had Norway come out and say already that if they're issued, that they will arrest Netanyahu if he shows up. So look, that's not insignificant. That's not insignificant either, right? But also, is Netanyahu going to Norway? I don't think so.
Well, certainly not after they make that announcement. You got to keep it
Right.
quiet till you get him. Children of the light who destroy electricity for other people. Children of the light who destroy the electric grid for Palestinians.
Yeah, they're just giving real children of the light vibes all the time.
They're giving like Chucky vibes. Somebody was like, when you translate an Israeli or a Zionist tweet, it's literally the worst thing you've ever read every time.
They live in a level of delusion or they're lying. Like either they are delusional to the point of illness or it's all a lie and they're just saying it to make people believe that that's what they believe, but that's not what they actually believe. They know they're evil and they just don't care. But
I think
like
it's the first one.
listen to Netanyahu's response to the arrest warrants. Also, before we get into that, Biden's response was, "What's happening is not genocide," even though that's not what the arrest warrants that were sought were for. So he's literally like, someone collect grandpa.
Oh, that's kind of like how Kendrick was like, Drake, you're a pedophile. And then Drake was like, I don't even like Millie Bobby Brown.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone's like, what?
But he's like, okay, well, I mean, he didn't mention her. You did.
Exactly.
Joe Biden, so defensive about genocide, he
Yes.
preempts the defense.
He
He preemptively striked the genocide defense.
He preempted. And I just want to point out that all of this is getting a lot of talk, but Israel has been committing massive violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, which we need to keep our eyes on. In particular, they committed a massive killing spree in occupied Jenin, in the refugee camp, killing a number of civilians, including Dr. Osaid Jabarin, the head of surgery at Jenin Hospital, a teacher walking to work, and ninth grade students, and 12 other people were injured by live bullets, including 4 children, a journalist, a paramedic, and 2 members of the Palestine Red Crescent crew, which is so on brand for Israel. It's like everybody that you shouldn't be killing. It's like a child, a journalist, a medic, a teacher. It's like all of these protected classes under international law. And it's copy pasting the same plan from Gaza to the occupied West Bank. We just are not even able to exercise the outrage about the occupied West Bank because, quite simply, Gaza's on fire. Yeah, whose reaction? You guys just gotta, it's like, it's just giving such delusions. And you're like, are you in the same world that we are? He said it was a moral outrage of historic proportions, and it will cast an everlasting mark of shame on the international court. And it's like, you are committing genocide. And I literally see how this plays out in the historical record. Like, I can see it already. And they're like, and then he said it was a moral outrage, but he committed the genocide. Like, it's so clear.
Yeah. You notice how his rhetoric is getting even more alarmist and like absolutist in a way that you can tell that he's fully disconnected from reality. And this is a story that I heard about the Second World War, where towards the end, when Hitler was heavily isolated, he was just looking at maps, super methed out, and he was yelling at like his generals basically to move troops between various places. And his generals had to remind him that his troops had already been killed by the Soviets. He was actually just like shouting blindly into the darkness, and like he had like pins on a map. He didn't understand that like he'd already lost, and so he was still commanding like he was on the top, like making these grand statements of like, we've got to, win here big and like move here like with great force. And then his generals would be like, so the thing is like, we already lost. They're dead.
And it's been over and it's been 5 years and you're in a nursing home.
Yeah. You're actually Joe Biden.
You're in hospice, sir.
Yeah. So, yeah, the thing is like when you're so disconnected from reality, you start making statements that are at odds with life.
Yes, much less actions that are at odd with life. Did you hear that lawmakers in Congress just introduced legislation giving Zionists who participate in the IOF access to American VA benefits?
No way.
Yes, I'm reading it right now. Giving Israeli Jews who participate in the IOF visa-free entry into the USA, Medicaid, and bumping them to the top of the organ transplant list on U.S. soil. It says the service of a citizen of the United States in the Israeli Defense Forces shall be treated in the same manner as service in the uniformed services.
They are giving IOF murderers a Disney Fast Pass at the VA.
Yes. Yes. Hold on. This is like not even getting any news.
They said, hey, if you committed a genocide, come on down. We will treat you. Did Hamas fuck up your legs? We'll get you a nice little cane to walk on. Should you have probably stayed the fuck out of Gaza? Yeah. We'll take the medical bill.
Did you know that Anthony Blinken's name is not Anthony Blinken?
Yeah, didn't we talk about that with Max?
No, we didn't. We with Max we just called him A Blinken. But his name is Antony. There's no H. It's not Anthony, it's Antony.
Okay, wow. I didn't know he was in the mafia.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you know that he wrote an op-ed, "What Putin destroyed, Russia must pay to rebuild"?
That makes sense. He would write some dumb shit like that.
Just wondering if it's going to be the same policy for Israel. What Israel destroyed in Gaza, Israel must pay to rebuild. Won't hold my breath, of course. He literally tweeted that 2 days ago, and it's like, do you people do like a tone deaf check? Does anybody tell you people, like, is there anyone in the room that's like, hey guys, don't do that? It's an easy target.
They're really trying to get US citizens to hate Russia, but Russia is not sending my money to do a genocide. Like, the United States government is the issue. They are sending my money to go do a genocide. Also, like, genocide in and of itself should be bad, whoever's paying for it. Like, we should just be able to agree on these things. But they're like, Russia is the boogeyman. Russia is bad. You should fear Russia and Iran. And I am like, well, that's wild because Russia is not sending my money to do the genocide. And also, Russia is not in charge of the genocide. Like, you guys built a port there recently, actually, to import more weapons. The United States government did. So, it just seems hard to be like super concerned about Russia when it's the United States government who is doing genocide and then facilitating infrastructure to do genocide and then beating up college students in the United States, murdering brown, black, indigenous people in the United States. It's just so hard to be like, you have to be terrified of Russia and Iran when I'm just not.
I'm literally not.
My position is like, if the CIA is on one side of something and then the Palestinian resistance is on the other, that's a pretty clear moral compass moment.
Also, did you hear Lindsey Graham said about
I
the
don't often hear him.
Yeah, he said about the ICC, quote, "If they do this to Israel, we're next." And it's like, yeah, that's the point.
That's great. That's the self-awareness that we need, right? He wasn't like, oh, we're going to make Russia pay for it. He was like, oh, shit, our time is coming.
Oh shit, like we are not above the law. Oh, the law has to be applied to everyone.
Yes, he's having a moment, a bit of a come to Jesus moment, right? Where he's realizing the consequences of his own actions.
He's the same guy who said we should nuke Gaza. So just let's be clear. I just want to wrap up by saying that the starvation in Gaza is getting really, really, really bad. According to the UN, there have been almost no trucks that have entered Gaza since May 6th, which was the day of the Israeli occupation forces' ground invasion of Rafah and their destruction of the Rafah crossing and closure of the Karam Abu Salim crossing. And we saw that today, on May 21st, UNRWA suspended Rafah food distribution as Israeli attacks continue and restrict aid flow, whatever aid is already in Gaza. So we are at a very desperate point, and every day is more desperate than the one before it. I wish there was some news that I could share from on the ground that would confirm or suggest to us that people were getting some respite or relief. But the reality is, every day continues to be worse than the one the day before it. And this last effort to suffocate Palestinians by starving them, by allowing almost no aid in since May 6th, actually brings us back to the level of siege that was in place in the days following October 7th. And it's taking place in a context where Palestinians in Gaza have already been beaten down and exhausted and tired and are injured and are dealing with having so many medical issues that are arising out of the context of this genocide. And they need good nutrition and they need clean water. And yet it continues to be choked off. It needs to stop. It needs to stop. Israel needs to allow all the humanitarian aid and food and water into Gaza immediately. They need to stop this genocide. They need to stop the bombs. They need to end the occupation. They need to dismantle their apartheid regime. They need to allow Palestinians to go back to their homes. They need to pay for all of the rebuilding and so much more. But they first need to start with stop dropping the bombs and stop starving the people to death.
I want to read a few statements by Zionist officials. Knesset member Ram Ben Barak stated, quote, "The war in Gaza is aimless and we are clearly losing it. We are forced to return to fighting in the same areas, losing more soldiers, losing on an international stage, damaging relations with the United States, and causing the economy to collapse. Show me one thing we have succeeded in," end quote. Meanwhile, former Zionist war minister Avigdor Lieberman stated, quote, "There is no victory in the north or the south, and we are like a ship without a destination. We have completely lost our way," end quote. 650,000 citizens have been forced to flee the city. For the 12th consecutive day, occupation forces continue to control the Rafah border crossing, closing it with the flow of humanitarian aid to all provinces of the Gaza Strip. The military operations witnessed by the Rafah governorate have caused the only hospital and primary care centers in the east and center of Rafah to go out of service, severely endangering the lives of injured and patients due to the lack of necessary medical care. The spokesman for Al-Qassam Brigades, Abu Ubaidah, said the enemy leadership sends its soldiers into the alleyways of Gaza only to return in coffins, searching for the remains of some prisoners they deliberately targeted and killed previously. Netanyahu prefers his soldiers to be killed while searching for remains and bodies rather than going for a prisoner exchange that does not serve his political and personal interests. And this is from the Resistance News Network Telegram, the Resistance Telegram. The enemy is accustomed to quick, swift battles, accustomed to defeating its enemies in days or weeks. However, to fight for 8 months against Gaza and fail in front of it, this instills a spirit of defeat. Israel today is shaking. Its walls and its foundations are trembling. It is losing confidence in itself, returning to the starting point. We are facing a historic moment. Honestly and without exaggeration, we have an opportunity to defeat Israel, God willing. We have an opportunity to dismantle the Zionist project, God willing. We have an opportunity to set our feet on the path of liberation and resolve the conflict to rescue Palestine, Al-Quds, and Al-Aqsa. We want a flood in the streets. We want the return of millions. We want demonstrations in Arab and Islamic streets. God, my brothers and sisters, we want your voice to be strong. We want the nation's masses to remain in their streets supporting the battle in Gaza, Al-Quds, and the West Bank, and declaring their anger against the Zionists and their allies. We want a flood besieging the Israelis and American embassies. We want continuous anger to stop this aggression. We want the flood of media to continue its message and stance. We want the honest Palestinian narrative to reach its fullest extent and to dominate all platforms in social and other media forums. We want a flood of legal action, as in The Hague, to prosecute the criminal killers. We stand with South Africa and these countries, just as Turkey and other countries like Libya and Egypt stand with them now. We want other countries to engage in this battle, to share this honor with our nation, to pursue the Zionists in all forums and platforms. We want the flood of all students to continue. These universities have gotten rightfully angry to support their colleagues and brothers and sisters whose universities were destroyed in Gaza and whose students were killed just as our people were killed.
It's a great place to stop.
Folks, that's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Check out our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at @thepalestinepod. And look for us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can.
We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because like I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon like all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.